Hey everybody, this is Dave Ponce. Dan Wright and I are talking in this podcast about anti-heroes in film, television, and print. Thanks for joining us.
And you look at SD broadcast and everything that came along before 16:9. I was actually looking at NYPD Blue. They've reformatted it now so that it's 16:9. Yeah, it's interesting to go look at that. And this is from, I think it was NBC. They've redeveloped that show and run it through whatever editors create 16:9 framing. But you're just reminded of what was acceptable 30 years ago.
I wanted to go back through that show just for Dennis Franz's comments and keep a notebook and write them down, because they wrote him so funny consistently all 13 seasons. I loved how great he was in that.
Yeah. And his character started in Hill Street Blues and then got spun into NYPD Blue. And the episode that I watched of NYPD Blue was episode 1, season 1. And I remember when this was being marketed, this was one of the first network broadcast shows that was going to have nudity. And I remember in the days after those first episodes, the general sort of late night talk show monologues were, who wants to see Dennis Franz nude? Any of you? I don't. And that just became the joke. But of course, he ended up winning Emmy Awards. And really the arc of that character of falling in love with the prosecuting attorney and struggles with alcoholism and all those other things, it became a prototypical character of this is what a leading man can look like, even though he doesn't have leading man looks. It was really a tremendous performance.
The only other show that I have ever seen that spanned that long and kept its central main character, but the rest of the cast around him just changed completely, was the British version of Shameless. But I'm with you. Dennis Franz's character in that all the way through, he was great.
Yeah, the guy that was his partner early in that show, because that was the big change to that show, was that it went from
I don't remember that actor's name.
I'll have to think of it. He ended up being in CSI Miami as the star and had quite a career himself. But the first time most of us saw that guy, and we're going to have to look up his name, my brain is not what it used to be. The first time we all saw him was in Hill Street Blues as the gang leader for the Irish Boys gang. And in Hill Street Blues, they would have these summits, if you remember, with gang leaders. And that guy was the gang leader because he just looked so freaking Irish.
I love that you brought that up. Reminded that Giancarlo Esposito does a couple of roles in that show over a couple of seasons. And it reminded me of Star Trek of, this alien is also a Vulcan in that next season over there. Like he was a drug addict in one of the episodes. A few seasons later, they brought him back and he was much more put together of a dude that they brought back. But you see him early in his career.
I'm going to look up the name of the actor that was in NYPD Blue with Dennis Franz. David Caruso is that actor's name. That
David
the red-haired actor. And it's so funny because I'm trying to think, was it like an Irish name? And it ends up, no, he's Italian. And then what happened with David Caruso in that role, his love interest was a police officer. And so the arc of what was the leading man's role in that in NYPD Blue was Caruso was in the middle of splitting up from another attorney, Sherry Stringfield, who was that actor that played a prosecuting attorney, or maybe a defense attorney. But anyway, they're breaking up. They're just now separating. And then Amy Brenneman, a street cop, starts coming on to the David Caruso character. And that's one of the first pieces of nudity in that show is the two of them in a love scene. And then later in the episode, Dennis Franz's butt. Anyway, Caruso, he was that Hill Street Blues gang leader, and then did this stint on NYPD Blue, and that gave him the ability to go get another show lead, which was CSI Miami. And the actor that replaced Caruso as the leading man was Jimmy Smits. And Jimmy Smits had a really successful run with LA Law. And so that created for him the ability to get that other lead role. Man, I watched every episode of NYPD Blue. I just thought it was so well crafted. Rick Schroeder came in then after Smits, right? Or was it before?
That's right. I think so.
And it seems like one other lead actor also made an appearance in that. I'm scrolling now here through the NYPD Blue cast.
Yeah, me too.
David Schwimmer is in this as a love interest in the very first episode. He's this kind of, imagine that character that David Schwimmer plays, a little bit needy, a little bit not quite as fully realized as other men around him. He ends up being the love interest of David Caruso's ex-wife, which is really funny because all of these people of course, work together all the time, every single day, and drama and comedy ensue. I'm just looking down
My
here.
own
My
classification
apologies.
for him was that he is an Eeyore.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Wow, I didn't remember this. Danica McKellar, Winnie Cooper from The Wonder Years was in the cast.
Oh, yeah.
And what I'm seeing here, I don't know that they put them in hierarchical order. It's a really amazing thing to go through here and look at this. 1993, Dan.
One of my other takeaways from
Amazing.
NYPD Blue was the phrase, he needs a tune-up, meaning he needs you to
Right.
beat him up a little bit.
Right. The euphemism
Which
for...
is a great segue to talk about grandchildren.
Oh, yeah. That's right. Something more than just AI happened in your world this past week.
We have a new grandbaby, and mom and baby are doing great. So this is my oldest daughter's fifth child. And so little girl and then four boys. Very fun. And so all four of the older children came over and spent the night at our home while mom was delivering little brother. And like the 2-year-old became an older brother, which is nice for him, but also
I bet he doesn't think it's nice right now.
That's right. He has seen for himself that he has been supplanted as the baby in the family,
Yeah.
which has been fun. But yeah, all they care to watch is Pokemon. That's it.
You could do worse.
It certainly doesn't have the star-studded cast that NYPD Blue had. But speaking of that, did you know that Bryan Cranston was an early enemy on those Power Ranger shows? They put him in a foam rubber suit, and he had to do karate at them and stuff.
Oh, that's so funny.
Like,
what an actor. What a career.
Oh.
The shorts that I see a lot of times in Facebook are
Yeah.
Seinfeld shorts that he's starring in as that dentist, in these little clips that are just the greatest. I may have even talked about one of those in one of the earlier podcasts where Cranston is talking about being on Seinfeld, and he's talking about that scene in particular where he's about to work on Jerry, and he takes a hit of the gas, Cranston's character does, before giving it to Jerry. And that idea came from a grip working on the set.
Yeah.
And he credits that guy. He says, we're all sitting around there waiting for a take. And the guy says, what would really be funny would be if the dentist took a hit of the gas before he started working on Jerry. And they all just couldn't believe what a tremendous idea that was. And so they worked that into it. And of course, it was water cooler conversation after that. It was just one of those genius moments.
The writer who was on The Office, the one who was in the back, and I can't remember his character name, all of the people in the back end of The Office were all the writers on the show. That's what their bullpen of writers was.
JD something or other.
That's it. That's who I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of his name.
And he talks about the early part of his writing career when they're script writing, and they finish it, and he knows it's funny, but he said, I saw Rainn Wilson go off script and make what I had. He said, at first, he said it violated what to me was just sacred. How dare you go off script? He said, and then it was immediately funnier than the thing I had written.
Yeah. BJ Novak is his name. I'm now going to just start using my phone to bring up names that we can't remember because why not?
BJ Novak. Well, let's go back to Bryan Cranston. I knew him first, as probably we all did. His Malcolm in the Middle work will remain as genius television as genius gets. Like, it's just, it's so good.
I hold some things that I hold as moments of great parenting in my life. One of them is that I'm the one who told my kids, you've got to go watch Breaking Bad. I'm the one who told my kids, you've got to go watch Arrested Development. Those two shows in particular. And in Breaking Bad, in season 1, episode 1, they have Bryan Cranston's character in underpants and a t-shirt, which is something that he did over and over again in Malcolm in the Middle. And I respected everything about that show from that moment. It was great in its own right. But I'm thinking about all the decisions that Vince Gilligan made and that other people made in that show. And one of them is, okay, we've got Bryan Cranston, and everybody knows him as this sort of sight gag, hyperbolic dude who they have seen in Malcolm in the Middle in his tighty whities a lot. Let's just get that out of the way. And it's in these gravely serious moments early in the show that they pull you into the show. But it is genius to me, Dan. I can't tell you what it meant to me to be like, you respect me as a viewer that you're doing that right now. That is like, oh, smart people have shown up here that understand their audience and that understand their audience's appreciation for that actor. and for this transition that they're asking us to make with him, which you want to talk about a left turn
Oh,
from what he
man.
was in Malcolm in the Middle. Unbelievable
Yes.
actor, just
Yes.
unbelievable.
I heard Anthony Hopkins called him after Anthony Hopkins binged watched it and got a hold of Cranston afterward to congratulate him on the actor that he was.
Mm-hmm.
And what else is there than the recognition of your peers that you are at a level of expertise, that you are masterful.
And in Breaking Bad in particular, the two moments for me with him, one of them is his "I am the danger" line in that scene where he's talking with Skylar about her fears about what is happening in his life and what's going on. And doesn't he feel like he's in danger? And he says those words, "I am the danger." And I'm getting goosebumps saying it out loud right now because I just remember in that moment. And then the other one is his, toward the end of the show, his admission to Skylar. No, I didn't do this for the family. I did it for me. I did this because I love this juice. I love this energy. I love being this person. And those two things, those of us, I remember having a conversation maybe with you years ago about how weird it is that we root for the gangsters in mob movies. It's just so strange that, like, you're really rooting for Tony Soprano to break through and figure out his life. And the Godfather films, you're rooting for Al Pacino to get revenge on all the bad guys. You're rooting for these murderous people. Anyway, it's really funny how we get to that. But I think the thing that has created dimensionality in film and television, the emergence of television as a medium, and the thing that happened from when it was, Ozzie and Harriet, Father Knows Best kind of stuff, to All in the Family, and to the twist that happened in comedy and then really happened across the board in all entertainment, was we are going to stop creating one-dimensional characters that basically serve as a sanitized version of America, air quotes, and of the American life, air quotes. And I'm old enough to remember those controversies related to All in the Family, where they had a toilet flushing as a part of it. And you think about the years that, for example, the Dick Van Dyke Show and the I Love Lucy show, I Love Lucy in particular, this is a married couple, and they slept in twin beds in their bedroom because that's what the censors required. And so much of really what came along in that shift and really happened in the cultural revolutions that came along in the 60s, in particular into the 70s, was we're going to start trying to be more truthful about what a hero looks like and about the challenges that hero has with the dark elements that they also are battling along with this other macro battle.
I was just telling Carrie the other day the debt that all of the Batman creative team owes to Frank Miller in his Dark Knight Returns, which was a comic, which the comics was under fire for that very kind of idea. It was gritty and it was pulpy and it was always disposable, but it's next door to adult literature in that way, and how it's viewed. It's low idea. So some of the low things creep into what that is, but the initial iterations of Batman, like, he's dark and Dracula-like. He's terrifying to the criminal. He's an enforcer, and he's not biting you on the neck. He's breaking your arm and punching you off a building, because he's not a killer, but he's a vigilante. The whole driving idea. Plus, you get that wonderful difference in the Playboy, similar to James Bond. He's a misogynist on the one hand, but also that's the guy you want going after the bad guys. So anyway, I think all the Batman creators, that was my point, they owe a debt of gratitude to Frank Miller for seeing Batman like that again in the new way of storytelling.
The origin story for Batman is as dark as you need it to be. Here's a young boy that watched his parents being murdered and that went back to having all of his creature comforts met. He has no fear over whether there's going to be another meal or a roof over his head, but lives in the torture of that, having everything provided for him, but having both of his parents taken away from him. And you have this moment where this kid is like, what does any of this mean if my mom and dad are dead? And ends up, serendipitously, whatever, choosing as his emblem to be a vigilante, a bat. And it's like, how much more darkness do you need? And you look at the Frank Miller treatment of that character, and there's something that seems so right about it. You're like, why How did we get to the Biff Pow campiness of the television show? And I'm a fan of that show, by the way. I love that show.
Me too. Oh, me
But
too.
but
I
one
love
of
it.
what it really describes in that range of expression of the character is how great the idea is that this child sees this horrific moment. Now, I want you to think about comic books having that as a piece of the origin story for something that kids are going to read. That in and of itself is pretty amazing. Now, those characters were being developed and they were being introduced to the world at a time when death was extremely common because of world wars. So you're constantly hearing about death tolls in a much more sanitized glories of war kind of way.
Well, medieval literature has its own ideas of sword play and of death and of, is that something you're going to do? And I have a friend who only reads cowboy novels, and there's a lot of shooting because the tools of killing and understanding the world is a dangerous place, I think, is part of what important storytelling is at all ages. I'm not saying that you should show your 3-year-old Lord of the Rings, and that's as cartoonishly violent as I can imagine. But I'm telling you,
I'll put it this way: what was the target audience for Grimm's fairy tales?
That's a great question. Those are dark.
You want to talk about horror, and those were fairy tales for children to hear, and many of them cautionary tales. I remember the first time a dear friend of mine was telling me he was doing this for a research paper in high school, and he was looking into the Grimm's fairy tales, and he was describing to me the actual original version of Cinderella. And it's, what? Because what ends up happening to the stepmother and the stepsisters is they are put into molten steel masks. They go around their heads, and they're put into molten shoes, and they have to dance in front of Cinderella and the princess family until they die. That happens at the wedding. Isn't that a lovely story?
Here's our connection to Walt with a machine gun in the trunk gunning the clubhouse, because the bad guy has killed the worst guys. Yes, we're rooting for that to happen.
Right. It's in the Rob Reiner movie, A Few Good Men, the character that Jack Nicholson plays, who is a bad guy, right? And when the Tom Cruise character or Demi Moore character go down there to talk to him, there's that moment where he just starts sneering at who they are and makes fun of him being in his little white Navy suit and makes fun of the fact that she's even in the conversation because she's a woman. And he starts talking about what it means to be the commander of a Marine group on the permanent outpost on enemy territory. And he says, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. You need the kind of person that I am. You need the one that's probably going to let one of the Marines that seems weak get beat because of what's at stake here. And he's calling to that part of them to try to get them to understand, I may be awful, but there is worse. And that's what Walter White is. And that's what rooting for Al Pacino's character, Michael Corleone, instead of the other bad guys, it is, I know he's really bad, but there's worse. And to me, it's the call to characters like the Batman character there are going to be times where that character, and you just accept it, he's fully dismantled whoever it is he's fighting and takes one more shot and breaks the jaw or breaks that arm, even though it's unnecessary, because there's this bigger battle that involves, I want, when that person tells the story of encountering this sort of law enforcement, I want them to be very afraid. You go back to when Grimm's fairy tale storytelling was happening. Those were three-dimensional characters. They had real good and real bad in them. You had no doubt if you were siding with somebody that they still did some really dark things. And in the early days of expressions of, I will call it in the sort of echo of what happened in the United States of America as it developed as a culture, and it's trying to wrangle all of these disparate inputs of the tired, the poor, and the yearning to breathe free, coming from all parts of the world, going, we've got to have some sort of a unified prototype to somehow be a rallying point around the growth of this nation and to have its own identity. And the pendulum swings toward this idea of this hyper sanitized, white hat wearing cowboy that never does wrong, no matter what, and that was always respectful, and that doesn't have any dark moments. And all of those are things we maybe aspire to, but they're not real. And at the point at which the storytelling pendulum comes back the other way. And for me, it truly was All in the Family. It was look at Father Knows Best and look at All in the Family side by side and go, what happened here? And what happened here was Norman Lear went, really? That's not really how fathers are. That's not really how a family is. Let's tell the truth. And that's not to say that those other shows, that Ozzie and Harriet and all those other things, I Love Lucy, didn't stand on their own. I Love Lucy is brilliant. The playground that they operated in is a very narrow playground. And really what's happened in storytelling, at least to me, is the playground has been broadened to the point where you can be hyperbolic about a three-dimensional character and enjoy that space. But you have to start with the three-dimensional character because people just won't pay attention to it anymore if you don't.